Welcome! So, today we're diving into something we've all felt, but probably haven't put a lot of thought into trust. And we're going to look at it in a place that makes a lot of us, well, a little nervous the dentist's office. You're about to see it's a way bigger mystery than you might think.
Yeah, we've all been right here. You know that feeling, right? You're leaning all the way back, lights in your eyes, and you have to put your complete and total faith in the person standing over you. That very specific, very vulnerable kind of trust, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so why is this so important? Because when it comes to any kind of healthcare, that relationship between you and the professional, it is everything. And the absolute core of that relationship, you guessed it, it's trust.
And look, this isn't just some vague, feel-good idea. The research is super clear on this. There's a direct line between how much you trust your dentist and how well things go. When patients have that trust, they feel more satisfied, they're way less anxious, and, this is the big one, they're much more likely to actually follow through with treatment. Trust literally leads to better health.
But here's the million-dollar question. We all talk about how important trust is, but what is it exactly? How do you pin it down? How do you define it, let alone try to measure it? Well, that's precisely the puzzle a team of researchers from the University of Dundee decided they had to solve.
So, they basically launched a full-on investigation. They decided to do a scoping review, which is a fancy way of saying they looked at all the research that's ever been done to find out what we actually know about trust in dentistry. You can think of them as detectives on a mission to find the truth. And like any good detective story, they had three main questions they needed to answer. First, could they find a clear, solid definition of trust anywhere in the research? Second, how are people even measuring it? And third, and I think this is the most interesting part, how do dentists think their patients feel about them? Now, to get their answers, these investigators cast a really, really wide net. They didn't just look in one or two places, they dug through four huge scientific databases, and they looked at over 40 years of research, everything from 1980 all the way to the end of 2021. They were determined not to miss a thing. All right, so they've got their plan. Now comes the hard part, sifting through a literal mountain of potential evidence. This is where the real detective work begins. So what did that first search turn up? A massive number. 1,875 articles. I mean, think about that. That's your first sweep of the crime scene. A ton of potential leads, and a sign that people have definitely been writing about this topic for a long time. Now, the first step in any investigation is you gotta clean up the evidence, right? So after they got rid of all the duplicates, the same article showing up in different databases, they were down to 801. Still a pretty huge stack of papers to get through, but the picture is starting to get a little bit clearer. Next up was the real screening process. The investigators had to read the title and the little summary of every single one of those 801 articles to see if they were actually relevant. And just like that, poof, the number of potential clues shrinks, big time. They were left with only 43 articles that seemed promising enough to read all the way through. And after they did a deep dive on those final 43, they were left with just 16 studies. That's right. Out of almost 2,000 articles published over 4 decades, only 16 were truly about what they were looking for. I mean, that discovery alone tells you a huge part of the story. So what did those final 16 clues actually tell our investigators? Well, this is where our mystery takes a really surprising turn, because the biggest finding wasn't what was in the research. It was all about what was missing. Remember their first big question? Let's define trust. Well, the verdicts came back, and there isn't one. After all that work, our detectives found that in the entire field of dentistry, there is no single agreed-upon definition of trust. The most important part of the relationship doesn't even have a clear definition. And get this is what really drives the point home. Out of those 16 relevant studies they found, only 4 of them even tried to formally define the thing they were supposedly studying. It's kind of like trying to solve a mystery without even knowing what the crime is. So if you can't define it, how can you measure it? Well, that was their second question, and it led to a similar dead end. There wasn't one consistent tool being used. Some studies used a scale that focused on things like competence and honesty. Others used a survey that was all about communication and patient control. They were basically trying to measure the same thing with completely different rulers. But maybe the most fascinating clue of all came from that third question, the dentist's side of the story. Only 2 studies even looked at this, but what they found was kind of remarkable. They found that dentists generally believe their patients saw them in a negative light when it came to trust. There's a huge disconnect happening there. So, after sifting through all the evidence, our investigation has come to an end. But the case is anything but closed. What's the final verdict on the state of trust in the world of dentistry? Let's just run through the key findings one more time. We have no clear definition of trust. We have no single way to measure it. There's shockingly little research on the topic in the first place. And to top it all off, dentists themselves feel like their patients don't trust them. The one thing, the only thing everyone seems to agree on is that good communication is absolutely central to all of this. And that leads us to the real takeaway here. This isn't just some interesting academic puzzle. If trust really is the key to getting better health outcomes, then we urgently need to solve this mystery. We need more and better research to build a solid foundation, to finally figure out what this critical thing is and how we can measure it. Which really leaves us with one last question. And this one isn't for the researchers, it's for you. When you're in that chair, what does trust actually mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Because in the end, that's the answer that truly matters.